Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. Well, we've covered many different geographies in the art world on the podcast. One area we haven't focused on as regularly is the contemporary art scene in India. Interestingly, I recall in the early 2000s, a select number of contemporary Indian artists started regularly appearing in the major auctions in New York, London, and even Hong Kong. And as a result, their global exposure increased tremendously. However, after the Great Recession and a fall in most of these artists' prices, auction houses haven't placed these works at auction as regularly. And I think as a result, their exposure within the global art market has diminished. But there are some exciting recent developments in the contemporary Indian art scene, and we wanted to chat with someone there to get a better sense of what's happening. So in this week's episode of the podcast, we chat with Aparajita Jain, director of Nature Morte, a leading gallery in New Delhi. Aparajita is also the founder of Saat Saath Arts Foundation, a nonprofit initiative to foster creative dialogue between Indian artists in the international art world. We hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks so much for listening. Aparajita, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on this, Adam. It's really an honor.
Of course, it's our pleasure. And really, it's been far too long since we've had a guest on to chat about the Indian art scene. And even before we jump into the broader art scene, I'm sure some of our listeners may not be familiar with Nature Morte, where you are a director, and it is one of the leading galleries in India. I remember we were talking about this before we started recording. I first came across the gallery actually in about 2019, when at the time a young rising artist who I was following named Salman Tour had an exhibition at the gallery. And of course, Salman has since gone on to do some amazing things and is now globally recognized. But tell us a little bit about Nature Morte and how its history and how it fits into the art scene in India.
So I'm going to be audacious and say that Nature Morte did, in a way, begin the contemporary art scene for India. Nature Morte was founded and is co-owned by my partner, Peter Nagy. He is an artist and left New York in the 80s to come to India and discovered India and fell in love with it. Nature Morte in India is 26 years old. His first few shows were with artists that are now adjectives for contemporary art. So artists like Subodh Gupta, Bharti Khair, Jitesh Kalat, Reena Kalat, Danita Singh. Of course, you bought Salman Tour. We've shown Salman Tour. We have now expanded our program slightly to show international artists as well, Tukral and Tagra. So Nature Morte is synonymous with contemporary art from the region. We also do show Pakistani artists outside of India. We are very, very dedicated to contemporary art from the region with an obvious focus towards India. We are focused on ensuring that our artists get international publicity and international exposure. We're very lucky to really be working with some of our country's best. And I think we've all grown together. So, yeah, but Peter began it 28 years ago.
Yeah, that's really remarkable to have such a successful run within the Indian art space for so many years. So as I mentioned, we really haven't had someone on the podcast to chat about the Indian art scene in a few years. It'd be great if you could kind of recap for us what the last few years have been like heading into COVID and how the scene has rebounded coming out of it.
So, interesting that you bring up COVID as a sort of an inflection point. I think the first inflection point, I'm going to go back a little bit, was the collapse of Lehman Brothers for India, where I think the first, they call it a bubble for Indian art, burst. Lots of markets burst, but the Indian art market for sure. And ever since then, I think we went back to basics of the market at large, where we focused on quality, content, and doing great shows. Cut paste to COVID, things were beginning to get stable, and then COVID hit. And I think that maybe for 2 months, everybody was just in shock. I don't know. I mean, everybody thought that they were going to shut their businesses because who was ever going to spend on luxury? And then a really weird thing started happening month three. We started getting calls from clients who were desperate to purchase. We saw revenge buying start maybe third month of COVID, and it's not really stopped. We saw people moving from two-bedroom homes to four-bedroom homes, people buying homes, people really working hard to make their spaces more beautiful, people getting addicted to the act of buying something that would stay with them, which is not to do with fashion, maybe. So we saw really, I mean, I thought it was strange because COVID was a moment for all of humanity to just stop and take stock of things and what was important. And we saw a ton of revenge buying. So while there were not that many shows, we sort of pivoted to online, which is what a lot of the world did. But we did well. And also, I think the surgence of like the tech entered art. And I think tech entering art allowed the world to become smaller for at least India and the world. So we had a lot of Zoom meetings with curators internationally, with the artists sitting in their studios. We had a lot of conversation and dialogue, and people had time for that. And that unleashed a new interest in art from the region. It's, of course, propelled by the rise of the Indian economy and the fact that the Indian diaspora has a lot of money, and 1.4 billion people and many more internationally. All those metrics work in favor of what we're seeing as an inflection point for Indian art.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned the Lehman Brothers collapse, because I do remember during that time, and really even a few years leading up to it, auction houses really did an effective job of introducing some of the leading contemporary Indian artists to collectors in the US and Europe and even many parts of Asia, and that was through featuring them in some of their major contemporary evening sales around the world. And they started to be collected by international art collectors. It wasn't just Indian collectors collecting these artists. And after the Great Recession, these artists' prices fell, and for the most part, since then, the auction houses haven't really given these artists, or even other contemporary Indian artists, that kind of selling platform. But it would be great if you can share your thoughts on how the contemporary Indian market is doing right now at this time.
So again, I'm going to pull back a little bit here. And during the last boom, there was a lot of punting going on. A lot of flippers came in on board to make hay. It was contemporary that was doing really well. And Catherine David, who at that time was the curator at the Pompidou, told me, Aparajita, that doesn't make sense. All markets are strong when the earlier art has been recognized and understood, and then the future comes. So in our case, of course, the moderns, what we call the moderns, and then contemporary. 2004 to 8 was all about Indian contemporary art, with record prices going, with some of our artists being included in important day and evening sales, being included with post-war artists, etc. What we're seeing today is a steady growth of museum shows for the contemporary artists, a steady number of buyers, but extremely crazy auction records for the moderns. I think that's the healthy way to go, and I think that's the right way of going. But what we're also seeing is scarcity developing very quick in the modern market. We have a huge issue of fakes in India now, but there simply isn't enough material. I mean, it's common sense to think that once there isn't enough material in the moderns, the next thing somebody's going to buy is going to be contemporary. Also, moderns have, it's now outpriced from the common guy. When I say common, most common people can't buy art, but the average art buyer can't afford moderns anymore. And hence, we're seeing a lot of people pivot to contemporary when they're building homes or they need to fill large spaces, or when they're exhausted of the multi-million-dollar figures that they have to pay for a small work and now are happy to buy important contemporary artists. So to answer your question about the contemporaries, I think what's happening is correct, which is actually building and focusing on careers, focusing on important collaborative projects and museums, and letting it organically grow till we have very good quality bodies of work to let the world decide how important they are for artistry.
And so, speaking about some of these contemporary artists that are flourishing in India, to what extent do you think these artists have been exposed effectively to the art world outside of the country?
I think there's always more that's possible. I think there's a lot more that can happen within India and outside as collaborations. We have been focusing as Nature Morte with our artists showing at visible, important museums or institutional spaces. We recently opened a massive show of Bharati Khairs at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. We are soon to open a Tukrala and Tagra show at SCAD. We opened Jitish Kalat at the Art Institute of Chicago. And these are just a few that we're working on. On the reverse side, in my nonprofit, the main courtyard at the Palace, which is the Sculpture Park, has Alicia Quade. Last time we had Richard Long. So first, I think there's an important cross conversation that is needed for artists worldwide so that they can learn and pollinate. The second thing is our art is being shown internationally. What we're also seeing is an increased amount of funding that is coming from art buyers and corporates from India. So, of course, there's Kiran Nadar, who owns a brilliant museum, which the new museum building will open in 2 years. And she has been supporting shows internationally with other museums. We have NMACC, which is owned by the Ambanis, that is working with international museums to bring shows into India. There are the Godreges, the Jindals. RMZ has just supported Yorkshire Sculpture Park. So what we're also seeing is the influx of Indian money and international diaspora Indian money coming into the arts and supporting Indian contemporary art internationally. Do we need more? 100% we need more. Do we need more museums in India? Yes, we do. But it takes time. For a country that, I always say this, for a country that has so many infrastructural needs and with so many people that still need education and skill building and jobs, art seems like a luxury. But I think that with the way the world is today, I think we need to demand beauty around us because I think that's the only thing that saves us from being so cynical and constantly canceling one another.
And so as we think about the future of the contemporary Indian art scene, are you seeing younger individuals take an interest in collecting art?
Oh, yes, we are. So when we say young, I would say 30 onwards, we're seeing a huge shift of people becoming aware. See, a lot of these kids are going abroad to study. And now we have second and third generation of boys and girls coming back from the States or England or some place in Europe. And for most places internationally, museum going is a regular thing. It hasn't been part of our everyday because we simply didn't have enough museums in India, or they were not exciting for people. It wasn't something you did. But they are coming back and art is a part of their everyday. So when they earn money, one of the things they want to do is buy art. My daughter, who's just finished NYU and with her master's at Sotheby's, when she collected money and the first thing she did was buy art. She didn't buy jewelry. She didn't buy luxury fashion. She just went and bought art. And she's a prototype of many, many, many young collectors here. So yes, the young collectors are, I would say, propelling purchase of contemporary art in India.
And I did want to ask you about philanthropy in the Indian art scene. It'd be great if you could share more about the nonprofit that you established, as well as really what the broader nonprofit landscape is like for the arts in India.
In the last 5 years, we have seen a large number of nonprofits sprout in support of the arts. And it doesn't only mean fine art, I mean other kinds of art as well. We have a lot more large corporates who are now dedicating resources to promoting the arts. We've seen museums open, so Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore. The Munjals are opening their museum in Delhi. Mrs. Kiran Nadar has already opened 2 museums and is now on her way to opening her third. We started a small, foundation called Saat Saath, which owns a sculpture park. Actually, maybe India's only international sculpture park, which is a PPP model with the government of Rajasthan. It's in an old fort in a 500-year-old palace. There are institutions in Kolkata, in Hyderabad, in Bangalore, more institutions coming up in Ahmedabad. So basically, what we're seeing is the birth of many new institutions. Are they enough? No, but it's a beginning. And I think good things propel other good things. So it is helping the arts because, first of all, artists have some place to go and reference works. We have places now that their works can be shown. We have places now where international shows can come into India so that people can see a Warhol in person, for example. And I think in general, all of this is collectively increasing the awareness and interest for art. So in our nonprofit, we decided to focus on public art. I really do believe in beauty and transcendence. I really do believe that art has a very important role to play in the human mind. And so it shouldn't only be restricted to the very rich. It should go to every kind of person. So in our sculpture park, we have all kinds of people come in. We have people coming in from villages, people who can't perhaps speak English, older women that have perhaps never been to school, very educated people, very well-traveled travelers. We have a huge demographic of people that are visiting the space. And what we're seeing is more sensitivity and awareness building. And in our way, that's what we wanted to do, contribute as much as we can back to the industry and the space that has given at least me so much.
Well, that sounds really incredible what you're doing there. And before we let you go, I wanted to hear what you think maybe some of the challenges and opportunities for the Indian art scene as we look ahead.
There are always opportunities and there are always barriers to those opportunities. And I think some of the barriers are infrastructure. I think that we need a lot more infrastructure in place for our market to grow. We need a lot more people who are skilled and educated within the arts to understand it. So right now, a large struggle is in hiring people. And that seems to be a large barrier towards growth. We, of course, need a lot more funding into the arts so that we can have many more institutions. 1.4 billion people needs many, many more museums. And I think more education, perhaps having art and art history as a part of every child's education would help sensitivity to it and a general awareness towards it, which I think would eventually contribute to the market at large. And opportunities, gosh, I mean, I think in terms of markets, I think India is undisputed one of the most important rising countries in the world. The number of millionaires and billionaires being added every year is staggering. I think all kinds of companies in the world are now looking at India to become the next consumer space. And therefore, I think we're in a really good place, even regarding our arts. And I think it's time that we really exported our soft power in the way that we deserve to.
Aparajita, thanks so much again for coming onto the podcast and sharing more about Nature Morte and your nonprofit space, Saat Saath Arts Foundation, as well as your really valuable perspective on everything going on in the Indian art scene. If our listeners want to learn more about the gallery as well as your foundation, what's the best place for them to visit?
So our website, naturemorte.com. And for the sculpture park, I think Instagram is the best place. It's called the Sculpture Park Jaipur. It has all the information there. We are en route to launching our new website for the foundation because, more information there. But both these places should give us enough.
Perfect. Thanks so much again.
Thank you so much, Adam, for having me. This was fun.